Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for my talk. So today I will be talking about Nubit, an adaptable DA secured by Bitcoin. I think everybody have some basic concept about what's DA thanks to Ethereum's EIP 48, 44, as well as the early marketing effort from Celestia. But for what do we mean by adaptability? So basically, you can think of why the original DA standard is focusing on the functionality about what it's supposed to do, it's supposed not to do. So you can think of the adaptability is focusing on other cross-cutting concern that is going to enable mass adoptions of DA, including but not limited to security and programming complexity, etc. So a quick introduction about myself. I'm Yu Feng. I'm a founder at Nubit. I'm also a CS professor at UCSB, where I've been doing research in the space of compilers and securities. And so let me start with motivating the problems. And here I'm just using two extremes in terms of completely different payment systems. And so I'm also going to use BTC ecosystem as a running example, but you can find similar problems in other ecosystems as well. First, I think everybody is familiar with the Visa payment system, right? So everybody uses Visa. And so a typical Visa system can process, on average, about 24,000 transactions per second easily. However, when it comes to the other extreme, and in this case, Bitcoin, so we have to say that there is a very steep price in terms of decentralizations and freedoms. For instance, the default Bitcoin mainnet can only handle around 4 transactions per second. So which means that there's a huge conflict between, on one side, we have seen hundreds of different protocols come into play, including L2, DeFi, Oracle, etc. And on the other hand, so we also seen that a lot of them was blocked by the bottlenecks of this data throughput. But at this moment, you might wonder, is that only problems on DA, and then can we solve all of them with DA? I want to argue that this is just the tip of the iceberg. And I'm going to elaborate with, again, BTC ecosystem as well, okay? So you can think of, since the beginning of this year, we see a whole bunch of scaling solutions in the BTC ecosystem, as many other ecosystems as well. For instance, we've seen a whole bunch of Bitcoin L2 come into play. But from the technical perspective, if you look at their data flow a little bit closer, you realize that all those L2, they're actually highly centralized. So what do I mean by highly centralized? So in the sense that, first, most of their firms are controlled by multi-sig. And even worse, so if you look at their data flow in terms of the way they publish transactions, and most of the data basically circulate within their own ecosystem. For instance, they have their own centralized server, they have their own centralized database. So which means that I would say those data actually never get to the Bitcoin mainnets. So which means that in this case, in some sense, you can think of even though we try to advocate the notions of Bitcoin Renaissance, but on the other hand, we have to sadly admit this fact that at the end of the day, a lot of projects, we are treating like Bitcoin as a meme. So if you look at the reason about the situations, you realize that there are multiple reasons. One of the reasons is that for majority of the L2 projects, storing data on Bitcoin mainnet is actually very, very expensive. It's very expensive and it's very slow, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And second, even if some of them want to store those data, let's say on Bitcoin, right now it's actually very, very tricky to store those data on Bitcoin, because unlike Ethereum ecosystem in which you can leverage tooling complete programming languages for doing the computations as well as the validation regarding the validity of your transactions. And in here, when you come to Bitcoin, because of the limitation of the Bitcoin script, there is actually no a straightforward and easy way for validate your transaction. As a result, it's actually very tricky to leverage Bitcoin as a settlement layer. And so as a result, luckily, so we have a bunch of smart people in this community, right? There's a whole bunch of effort in the space that try to mitigate this problem. We have BitVM, we have OPCAT, and the high-level idea of OPCAT is actually rather simple in the sense that, well, previously, there was a whole bunch of transaction data from the upstream application. They cannot settlement their data on the Bitcoin mainnet because of the computation limitations of their Bitcoin script. So what they can do is that if they enable OPCAT, right? OPCAT you can think of it's a very powerful instruction that can enable our developer to implement some more complex logic. For instance, one of the most crucial logics that we need in this context is that we actually want to implement a verifier at the Bitcoin mainnet, level, so that we can actually validate the correctness of the transactions from the upstream application. So in here, as you can see, this seems that the whole path actually get connected in the sense that we have applications, and we also have a path that allow the application data to get settled on the Bitcoin. So here I want to say that this is just the beginning of the entire big picture, because in addition to getting your data settled down, we also have a whole bunch of cross-cutting concerns that need to be addressed. For instance, one of the problems is that what happens if storing the data on the Bitcoin is going to be very expensive, right? As I mentioned on the problem of processing 4 transactions per second. And what happens, there is denial of service bugs in this verifier, in the sense that, because we know that one of the fundamental principles that blockchain has to enable is the property of liveness. Liveness in the sense that as long as there's I'm making a valid transactions, and those transactions should eventually get published into the Bitcoin mainnet. However, if there's any logical bugs happens at this settlementation layer, because of like this kind of new program environment that people never deal with that before, so it can potentially lead to denial of service attacks. So which means that the only way, because we don't have this kind of a gas mechanism like what people did with Ethereum, so which means that the only way you can do is to doing another hard fork. And that's something you don't want to do. So as a result, so basically this is the first instance of adaptable layer that we instantiate for the Bitcoin ecosystem. So you can think of at the top, what we do is that in order to mitigate the bottlenecks of this kind of data access cost as well as capacity, we introduce Nubit DA. So you can think of when you publish kind of transactions, majority of the data will be offloaded to the Nubit DA chain as opposed to the Bitcoin mainnet. And on the other hand, so because we have interactions with all those transactions, so which means that we can potentially perform runtime validations and verifications on those potential suspicious transaction and execution and revert them accordingly. So at this point, you might wonder, hey, since this all you need is just a DA, what happens if you just swap with other modular approach, right? You can use Slasher, you can use other solution as well. And this is not something those Bitcoin Maxi or Bitcoin OG they want to do, because similar to, like, let's say you purchase an LV from authentic LV from Paris versus an LV from, let's say, Xiushuijie in Beijing. That's very different, right? Because people want to pay that price for authenticity. So this is the same thing. One of the reasons, even though we have these kind of solutions to offload those kind of data from the upstream applications, and people still want to spend more money on storing their data on the Bitcoin mainnet. The reason is that they trust some property of Bitcoin mainnet. And then if you want me to coin those important property, I would say the most important feature are 2 aspects. The first one is economic security. And then the second one is the degree of decentralization as well as censorship resistance. So which means that in order to build a DA that actually enable mass adoptions, so implementing the functionality is just one first step. And a very important step that we need to address is to achieve a similar degree of economic security as well as censorship resistance. And that basically nailed down the core designs of Nubit. So I can talk about the details for days, but here I just want to highlight two important aspects. So first of all, so Nubit is a sidechain, so which means that the core component is the consensus protocol, which is secured by, in this case, hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin stakers. And then, so the second feature is that, so basically, compared to, let's say, existing sidechains, so that is going to be secured by a few dozens of validators, we can support hundreds of thousands, so which means that you can achieve a similar degree of decentralizations as well as censorship resistance compared to, let's say, the original features from the Bitcoin mainnet. And then, so the other features are pretty standard in the sense that because Nubit, you can think of is a decentralized DA solution, so which means that we need as many nodes as possible for running those kind of a storage node to store the user data. And ideally, we wanted to have as many copies as possible, but we have to admit it that so running those kind of a node can be very expensive, especially the size of the data grows like day by day. So which means that in addition to regular full storage node, we also enable a whole bunch of light nodes in which people can run your validator with your cell phone or with your laptop, etc. And at this point, you might already notice that thanks to Nubit's modularity design as well as the economic security ensured by Bitcoin as opposed to other altcoins. So basically, it's actually pretty straightforward to extend this horizon of Nubit that go beyond the scope of BTC ecosystem. And that's what we have been doing recently. For instance, since the interceptions in the beginning of this year, originally we start from supporting the projects from the BTC ecosystem, and then we gradually extend our scope to other ecosystems such as Ethereum, and we are also one of the first DA component that support Tom ecosystem as well. And so which means that in the near future, you can actually see a whole bunch of Telegram games and media application whose backend is using Nubit as a DA solution. And here's about our recent progress on Nubit. Basically, since we launched our testnet in June, we already finished 2 phases. And within those 2 phases, we already become the largest DA community in terms of the size of the Discord channel as well as the follower on Twitter. And we have over 400,000 members on our Discord channels. And we are about to launch the last phase of our testnet by the end of this month, where we are going to launch a couple of Telegram mini apps in which the user from our previous testnet can basically use their point to participate and interact with those games, and who is using Nubit as a backend. And so that's all for today, and thanks for listening. And if you're interested about recent progress, feel free to follow our social, and thank you.
Thanks, Yu. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much.